We are the One Story Podcast. We believe in the power of a story. Everyone has a story, and that story is meaningful. Your story can make a difference. Your story can inspire others. Your story is important. At the same time, ultimately, everyone's story is a part of one story, the big God story.
It's not what you said. You're not who you said you were. When are you alone? When will you come back home?
Hello, everyone. We're back with the One Story Podcast. We got a special episode for you today. My name is Drew, and I'm with Isaac.
Hey, buddy.
How you doing today?
Fantastic. Loving life.
It's a fine Sunday morning today, which is a little different.
My drive over here was amazing. Was
it?
Worshiping my car.
Yeah.
Since I'm not at church this morning, so I was feeling the power of the Holy Spirit.
You skipped out?
Ditched. Don't tell Kelly. He doesn't know where I'm at.
Well, he doesn't listen.
I called in sick. Yeah, he doesn't listen anyways, so who cares?
No, I'm just kidding. Love you, Kelly. Thanks for the room.
Yeah, shout out to Southlands. Thank you for giving us the space, even though we're not using it today.
So today we have Tom and Rachel White on the episode. First time we have a couple on the show.
Wrong.
That's true.
We
found
Walter White.
the real Walter White is here.
How's it going, Walter?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
We won't call you Walter anymore.
All right. Or Heisenberg.
Or Heisenberg.
All right.
It's just funny because there was the reference from, I don't know, a couple of shows in the beginning about talking about little Walter Whites running around the streets.
And this is kind of full circle. So, Tom, explain your connection with Ryan McBride.
So I knew Ryan, when we were younger, and, we had parallel crowds and stuff when we were younger. And then we ended up working together later on in Ryan's story after, sobriety and stuff for him. And we actually worked for his wife, Stephanie, at their business when we were in our early 20s.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of cool because we had called Ryan Walter White, and then Tom goes, no, I'm Walter White.
Legally, I'm Walter White.
I had to pull out my ID and show him.
So this is a cool episode. I'm sorry.
Rachel, can you talk into the mic? We want to hear your voice as well.
How are we doing today?
I'm good. Thank you.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Here we go again.
Talking over each other. We only have one mic for the guests because our budget was blown. Isaac's in charge of the budget, and he always has to have his kombucha, so it went to either kombucha or another mic. So.
Again, just if every one of you can just send us $1, we'll be millionaires.
We need another mic for having two guests on the show. So they're going to be passing it back and forth, which is going to be fine, but you might hear some ruffling of feathers. So
what?
I thought you were going to say something.
No, whatever it was, it's long gone.
All right, so Tom and Rachel, let's start this thing off and hear your guys' story. It's going to be a little different because we're going to hear two sides. Well, a story from Tom, story from Rachel, and then the intersection of the two, and we'll see where this goes.
Well, what I would like to bring up is how you guys ended up here. It's kind of fun for us, at least.
Oh, that's true.
So one of my really good friends is Drew's cousin, Nick.
Yep.
And he called us one day and said, hey, have you, started asking questions about God and things like that? And he was talking about the podcast and just kind of what it was doing, inside of him, and just kind of that how cool it was to hear people's stories and things like that. And then we listened to it, and I think the second episode heard Ryan McBride, and it was just crazy to hear somebody from our past kind of.
That must have been a trip.
It was a total trip. And then we're friends on Facebook, so we threw a message out there on Facebook and just said, hey, loved your story. And then talking to Nick, it was kind of like, I think Rachel threw it out on a call when we were at the house and said, hey, we'll share our story if they want somebody. And Nick's like, yep, we're going to call Drew. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, he hit me. It was cool because I don't think he started listening right away, and I didn't, shoot out a massive text blast to everyone that I know, that we were starting this thing, but we just did it on social media.
Don't worry, I did.
And then Nick's wife, Neela, said, or I think she saw it that we were doing this, and she shared it with him, and so he started listening, and he reached out to me right away, and it was really cool. It was encouraging. He's like, dude, this is awesome. I love it. I'm listening in. I'm, I have my own thing that I'm, processing with the whole God thing and all of that. And so it was really encouraging to hear that from him. And then like you were saying, he said, hey, I got a couple that might want to come on and share their story. I think it was more him driving it. I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's bring it on.
So Tom and Rachel are fans of this podcast.
Absolutely.
So
We love it. We love listening to, all the stories where we grew up. I mean, we've lived in Phoenix for almost, I've been there for 15 years and he's been there for 13 years. And just to hear even La Habra, La Mirada, the street name, Imperial Bowl, it's like, oh my gosh, it just brings back so many memories of just
That's
different
cool
time.
because I'm always the one wanting to know what corner the church is on. Is it on the south side or the north side of this corner? But it's just those stupid details that I like. I'm always trying to paint a picture in my head, and so, but I'm glad that someone else is doing it with me.
Or appreciating it.
Because Drew's always giving me dirty
Drew's
looks.
not.
Well, I think one of you guys went to Morning Star.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, my
Drew.
grandparents went to Morning Star
okay.
forever.
Yeah.
And they love that
Pastor
church.
Jack.
Yeah,
He's a
Pastor
good
Jack.
teacher.
They loved Pastor Jack.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Tom and Rachel they live in Phoenix. They're from Phoenix. Well, they'll get into their story, but they live in Phoenix now, and they drove all the way out here.
Just to be with us.
We put them up in a hotel, and all expense paid.
All-inclusive trip.
No, that's not how it works if you're out of state. We'd love to hear from you, but we don't have the funds yet.
I know we just finally start getting emails.
Yeah.
Maybe just talk to Nick. Everybody can just stay with Nick.
There you go. Nick's house will be the hub for our guests. That'd be awesome, actually. We'll talk about it.
Oh, that's funny.
All right, so let's kick it off. Tom, I think you're going to start for us, and let's hear your story.
Absolutely. So like Rachel was saying, I've been in Arizona for 13 years, but I grew up here in Orange County, born in 39 years ago in I think St. Jude. I don't remember what
St.
hospital.
Jude?
I think
Fullerton?
so, yeah.
Me too, brother.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's where I wish I had better,
Yeah.
communication with my mom about that. I don't know. I have a sister that's a year and a half older than me.
Okay.
Back when I was born at that time, my parents were, they were married, but it wasn't a great kind of relationship. They had some troubles, it was, they weren't really good for each other, if you will. Like my mom was Mormon, my dad's Catholic, neither one.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting because, I think my mom wanted to pull us more towards that side. My dad was kind of indifferent, but didn't really want to be involved in church.
So he wasn't a practicing Catholic.
Not really.
And that's what's funny about religions. It's like, this is my team, even though I don't participate. This is still my team, and
It can be like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And they had a lot of challenges. I mean, there was some, infidelity and, abuse, both emotional.
Is this stuff you witnessed?
This is early on in my story. So this is prior to just like my early ages. My parents actually got divorced when I was 2.
Oh, okay.
But because of that turmoil and just kind of how, they were together. I mean, they were like oil and water, they were just better apart than they were together. And, my mom left and there was some fear there. And there was a lot of,
You lived with your dad?
no, we left with my mom.
Okay.
Yeah, we left with my mom, and we actually left the state. Like first, we went to a battered women's shelter, and there was we lived there for a short period of time, and then we had to move on from there. And when we did, we drove to Arizona, and which is crazy because it kind of comes full circle.
Right.
Like now I'm back in Arizona, but I was 2 years old with my sister and my mom, and we drove to Arizona and didn't really have anything really. I mean, we lived in our car for a period of time. She only had enough money to really provide, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, things like that. So, to this day, I don't eat peanut butter. I can't even stand the smell of peanut butter.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like, I don't remember any of it at all, but my, somewhere in my subconscious, when I get peanut butter on my fingers from making my daughter sandwiches or something, it just freaks me out.
Wow.
It's really crazy kind of how your past kind of comes back and gets you like that. But,
Yeah.
Within I don't even know the timeline, it was a week or two. My mom had a job and got an apartment and got us basically out of the car and, living in an apartment in Phoenix or Tucson, somewhere in Arizona. and just really, from that point, it was just a whirlwind. Like my childhood up, actually most of my life has been kind of a whirlwind. But so from 2 until, 8 years old, I think I was, from Arizona, we traveled all over the country. I think we were in like 30 states before I was 8.
Wow.
Doing what?
My mom did airport. Did like, I don't know, administrative work for an airport construction company that did stuff on military bases. So it was a civilian company that traveled. We traveled around basically.
That doesn't sound like a bad deal. Kind
Well,
of sounds like kind of cool.
You would think that, but even to this day, it affects you from not having a sense of home, a sense of belonging,
Structure,
a sense
of good foundation.
Yeah, like she and I, we went through our heritage not long ago, and it kind of, it brings back all these things, when we're young, and kind of my baseline has been chaos. Like that's kind of my baseline, and hers has been structure her whole life, and we'll get into kind of how that all happened. But like that whole, when we were 8 years old, my mom thought she was, she got sick, and they found what they thought was cancer, and she thought she was gonna pass, so she wanted us to know our dad, and we hadn't known him from. I didn't really know him at all because, I was 2 years old.
You were.
Yeah. So when we were 8, we came back to California to meet my dad on Christmas, which is kind of crazy because, for Christmases prior, you see kids with dads and you always wonder like, hey, I wonder what my dad's like. Like, you just never knew what it was like to have a dad,
Right.
So yeah, when we were 8, we came to California. And
did that was that just your normal, or did you grow up like, before you met your dad, like wondering who he was? Or
there was definitely some wonder. Like my mom tried not to bash too much, you know what I mean? But there was some honesty to the story.
Yeah.
So we knew a little bit. We didn't know all of it. We find out a lot more as we get older, you know.
Right.
But yeah, there was definitely some yearning to want to know who he was, and kind of, I think there was a couple times for like I was just like, I just wish I had a dad, kinda,
Yeah, I bet.
that natural feeling, So yeah, when we were 8, we met my dad, and he had a girlfriend at the time, and it's funny because for Christmas they brought us clothes for a 2-year-old. And then it was almost like time stopped, and a remote control car for like a 16-year-old, and I was like 8, so it was a little bit of confusion there.
They were trying.
They were trying 100%. They were trying.
Maybe he was just holding on to it from when you guys left.
Yeah, who knows? No, it was.
Oh man,
it was interesting though. So yeah, so we met him.
How was that moment when you guys met? Like, where did you meet at his house, or?
We met at my grandparents' house in Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can still remember, I remember all, like, just the whole. It's weird. It's kind of one of my first real memories.
Okay.
And yeah, I just remember them coming and meeting him, and
you were already at your grandparents, and you knew they were coming.
We knew they were coming, and yeah, and they brought gifts, and it was like, I don't know you, so I called him Walt. His name's Walter White as well. So yeah, we called him Walt.
How'd you feel? Were you like nervous?
There was definitely,
scared?
I don't remember all the feelings, but I definitely do know I was. There was some nervousness because I still knew some truth. I knew some of the history. I didn't know a lot of details. Which is probably healthier for an 8-year-old to not know those details.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there was definitely, I had a hard time giving him a second chance. Like I said, I called him Walt for a year and a half.
Were you guys living down here?
We moved back because my mom, she thought she was going to pass. So she was going to have surgery and do all that stuff. So, she wanted to make sure we weren't, left to just anybody or whatever. So they ended up rekindling their relationship and getting back together.
Really?
Yeah, kind of crazy. Yeah, so they kind of got back together, and we moved. I remember we lived in a condo in La Habra. It's weird how things take you in and out of certain cities and back, and yeah, we lived in La Habra, and then a short period later moved to Fullerton, where we lived from like 3rd grade till 7th grade, I think.
Okay.
And things were okay. I mean, they were on and off, for that period of time for the first, 4 years or so. It was, it was still, we had
You mean like between your mom
between
and your dad?
them, yeah.
Were they still arguing a lot? And
There was argument. I mean, there's still, they had a history, right? I mean, it's there's a lot that they had gone through, and again, we talked about this before the show, is that closure, that really addressing those things never really happened. And I think that was a big part of why it continued for so long.
Right.
They for those first few years, it was pretty good for I think 2 years, and then there was a blowout, and we moved away for a week, and then came back, and
wow,
yeah, and it was like that for quite some time, and probably around I think 6th grade or third. No, I think it was like 3rd grade, 12, 13 years old.
it's like 7th grade.
7th grade?
Yeah.
Is that
8th grade.
when?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. See, that's horrible.
No good.
Yeah, I think that's when I started playing like sports and kind
Okay,
of
what'd you play?
I played football and baseball.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, we don't talk about baseball on this podcast. So
I
how was your
heard
football
that.
career?
Yeah, it was all right.
What'd you play?
Fullback and linebacker.
Oh, that was me.
Nice.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
whole life.
Yeah, so I mean that ended up
Explains a lot, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. We hit our heads way too much. Yeah, rattling that brain. I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't quite ever come back.
Just got your bell rung. No big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Get back into there.
Yeah, that was when you got a concussion. And you're like, can you see straight? Okay, go back.
You're
Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
You're good.
I had a coach rub some dirt on and get back in there. So, yeah, so found myself playing sports. Really, really enjoying it, but I don't know. There was always this insecurity and this like lack of self-confidence, if you will. Like I started off as a lineman and kind of worked my way. My body hadn't quite come around, and when I actually started to get good at sports, I didn't quite have that self-confidence, but I was pretty good. I did fairly well doing it. I ended up actually having a scholarship to CSUN right before they lost their program. But that's later. That didn't end up kind of come through. But yeah, so so I found myself in sports, and with my dad, I think we've always had kind of this, like we just haven't had that nurturing, loving relationship. It just never really came to fruition.
Right.
I think a lot of it was me, being with my mom during that time and still harboring some resentments, if you will, for the past. And, growing up, he and I, got into it a few times, and, we really only found, ourselves, as far as getting along and interacting around a couple of things. One of them was wrestling and fighting, right? Which is natural for a young boy to want to beat on his dad, I guess.
Right.
And working on cars. So,
That's cool.
But during that process, like my dad knew, he's one of those guys where you take him a problem and he'll fix it, and you just, God, how is it so easy for you? And it was just so hard for me to fix. And that was kind of our relationship with cars. You'd be like, hey, go change the brakes in the Bronco. And I was like, I've never done that before. And he was like, well, go try.
Figure it out.
Yeah, figure it out. So kind of learned that way, and I think that was good for me from a lot of perspectives, but it wasn't, for me, it wasn't good for, like, I had a hard time asking for help or, things like that. Like even later in life, you kind of find yourself internalizing things because you're like, gosh, every time I go over there and ask for help, he just fixes it. And it shouldn't be that hard. I should be able to get this. So I held myself to a higher standard, and, I just became like my worst enemy as far as, my biggest critic. And,
Right.
so even excelling at sports and, doing all that, like, throughout high school, and
It was never good enough.
it was never good enough, and never felt like it was.
And that
good
was just
enough.
from your own perspective. So which makes it kind of, that's a weird dynamic, because it's not like someone's telling you you're not good enough. It's like, no, I'm not good enough for anything. I'm not worthy.
100%. I struggle with that. I mean, you can tell me 1,000 times, but there's something internally that just doesn't click.
I get it, man.
Yeah.
For
So.
sure.
So yeah, I mean, it was a tough time. I mean, nobody knew anything. During these years, my mom and dad weren't really, you know, they were great for a year or two, and then it was just downhill, and we'd leave. Right, we'd move out and go somewhere, and then come back, and then, you know, there was, you know, a lot of, for my dad and I think it was 14 or 15, and we finally just got to a point where we couldn't wrestle anymore, so it just kept getting serious, and it was like, you know.
Wait, did you guys used to wrestle for like fun, like each other?
It wasn't fun towards the end, yeah. So it was,
but it started off like.
It started off fun, and so I'm a little over 6 foot. You know, at the time I was, you know, I think when I was 14, I was probably 160 or so. You know, I'm 250 now, but my dad's 5'9". You know, always been about $165.
So when you started winning is when it started getting serious.
When it wasn't, I don't even know if I'd call it winning, because he never let it get to that point. It was once it started getting a little bit more equal, it got serious. Yeah. So, and it did. It got really serious really fast. So we just kind of got away from that. And I think at that point, I was probably 14 or so. You know, that took one aspect of our relationship.
Because that's
away.
something you guys did together.
That was something that was
connected with.
really
it was fun. Okay.
The only physical connection that we would have. Like, we didn't hug, or, you know, there was no I love yous or anything like that.
And it's probably something that could have been, or you probably wanted or needed. You didn't even know you wanted it, but like not being with him that whole time, you know, it's just like wanting that acceptance from your father, you know, and what better way to get it than a hug and I love you, you know. It's,
yeah.
I mean, we've talked about it before. It's something like my dad is just, you know, like, I love you, Dad. You're like, oh, yeah, what? Okay, gotta go. Nice talking to you.
Yeah. It was a different time. I've heard you guys talk about it. It's a completely different. They grew up in a different time where, you know, emotions and feelings weren't spoken about. And, you know, my dad had a really bad childhood. I mean, he was, you know, he did a much better job than his parents did.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, we come, like, there's, I don't know, I was, maybe 14 or so. And my grandfather ended up killing himself and his wife. And that was kind of like, I mean, it affected my dad, I think, but it, you know, it was, I never knew my grandma. Like, they were all kind of, they all had this, like, you know, just mental issues, I guess you'd say is the easiest way, emotional issues that were never dealt with. And, you know, I think I was 14 or so when my grandfather did that, and I had barely known him, but, you know, he had, I don't know the numbers exactly. There was many brothers, you know, I think it was like 9 of them total or something, and over half of them ended up committing suicide, and a couple of them committed, you know, other crimes as well. And it was just so, you know, growing up with that, and then, you know, my dad did a heck of a lot better than what he was handed, you know. You know, nobody's perfect, and you know, that emotional and, you know, even the chemical part, even it comes with you from generation to generation. So growing up,
iniquities of the forefathers. Yeah,
growing up for me, I was scared. I mean, I would go, you know, I mean, I had the same temper, you know. It was it was scary at times, you know. Like, there was times where, you know, I could have gone to jail easily, you know, walk into somebody's house and just, you know, wail on him and walk out like it was no big deal. Like, it was crazy times, you know. Like,
was that like, I don't know, just like in what context though?
So, like, that one particularly, it's kind of weird because I struggle with codependency, which is, you know, kind of finding yourself and your happiness in others. That particular situation was, you know, it felt justified, you know, kind of like, I don't know what you call it, vigilante or whatever. So one of my friends, they got jumped and kicked in the face and ended up in the hospital, and there were some racial slurs involved there, and I just snapped. And I knew a guy with a red hat, and we were outside. I went and found him. I walked into his house and just found him and walked out. It was just,
I don't know. It just sounds like a good friend to me.
Well, yeah. Well, I could have had good friends in prison for that one, probably.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
if it would have happened, you know, I mean, I was very, very lucky. And I think, you know, during those times, even growing up, God's really, you know, kind of sheltered me and guarded me against, you know, a lot of things that could have happened. You know, I think there's a lot of our stories can be like, hey, we could have ended up in whole lot different than
Oh,
it
yeah.
Talked
did.
about the
Definitely.
hindsight, miracle thing. Did you know God growing up?
I didn't. So my mom was Mormon. She did try to introduce us into the Church of the Mormon Church. So of course, like a good Mormon child, you get baptized. I don't even know what age it was, like 8 or something like that, or
Something like that. Yeah.
9 or. So I was baptized in the Mormon Church, but we didn't go. I was even in high school. I had people, oh, you go to my church. I'm like, that's weird because I haven't been to church in years.
Mhm.
But they have a list,
Oh,
and they
the
know.
names.
Yeah, if you're in a certain
Really?
area for the Mormon Church, if you're in a
Wow.
certain area, they know
You're a part of that ward.
you're a part of that ward. Exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there were people I went to school with that were like, hey, you're part of our church. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But it was, again, there's a feeling of wanting to belong and, things like that. So it kind of felt good a little bit, you
Right.
know.
You were a part of
I was
something.
part of something. I didn't
Right.
have necessarily the belief system. I was believed in God. I always, I prayed quite a bit, more so from a needs basis, if you
Right.
will.
Yeah,
like
when you need something.
I need something, I'm gonna
Get you
pray
out of
about
trouble
it.
or-
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he was always faithful, even in times where I wasn't.
Mhm.
Which is always a pretty cool.
Yeah.
Testament to God's grace. And even before I knew about God's grace,
Mhm.
like the hindsight, like
Yeah.
looking back, it's like, gosh,
Exactly.
without him, he has a plan for all of us, right?
Mhm.
And he knows where he wants us to be and how we're going to get there. And some of us have to do some stupid stuff to get there, and that was kind of my story. I did a lot of stupid stuff, so my wife is lipping a lot
Yeah.
of stupid stuff. So
at this point you're in high school or
I'm in high school. Everybody, it's interesting because nobody knew. Like, if you ask anybody during that time, nobody knew that was my lifestyle. Nobody
Mhm.
knew that I had that chaotic home life, and
Mhm.
it was good. It was really good at times, and then it was really bad at times.
Right.
Which I think kind of develops you. And one thing I struggle with right now is, and I've always struggled with, is an on and off switch rather than a dimmer,
Mm.
because it's always either really good or really bad, or
Mm.
it's yeah.
Well, because you didn't have the stability. I mean, your whole life moving to different states with your mom's work, and then the unstableness of your parents when they were together, like that. You didn't have that something that you can just count on to be there.
Exactly. Yeah, there was definitely, and that's an emotional piece that, as I get older, kind of putting that together as a father to make sure that I instill that into my kids' lives, and
Yeah.
make sure I don't,
Definitely.
replicate
How many
that.
kids
But
you have?
we had 2 kids, 3 and 6.
Boy, girl?
3-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, they're
Mhm.
amazing. So yeah, and we're in high school, so nobody knew. Everybody thought it was like the perfect home life, and of course me, I didn't want anybody to know either. It's I hit it really, really well until I was probably late junior, early senior year, and I ended up, leaving the house and essentially moving in with a friend of mine,
Oh.
a good friend of Nick and I's,
Okay.
and I slept on his couch.
Hmm.
And that's kind of I like to say the start of my couch career, because
Been there, brother.
yeah, well, so I was a really good surfer, just happened to be on couches, not very good in the water. So I started sleeping on the couch, and I finished, so a couple of my friends started to really know and realize what was going on, and
Mhm.
I had some really good people in my life, really good families, and just great men, whether they were Christian or not. They were just good men that took me in, and
Yeah.
and loved on me, essentially, in a way I'd never been loved on.
These are your friends'
My
dads.
friends' dads.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Even your uncle as well.
Mm.
So it was, I had a really good relationship with a lot of my friends' families, but didn't quite have that same one at home.
Right.
So it was, I kind of found myself finding another family in my friends, and
Yep.
kind of a pseudo family, if you will. You know, and I learned a lot doing that. So I actually, at that point, I was, you know, finishing my senior year. You know, I was supposed to go away to play football in college at CSUN. Like I said, the year before they lost their program. Hopefully it wasn't my fault. Yeah. So I graduated. I quit playing baseball because it's not a sport. Not really. I just thought I'd get some points here.
We accept you now.
Yes.
You're in the fold.
So I quit playing baseball so I could, you know, I said so I could focus on football, but really I just wanted to let loose, you know.
On that part of the season or that part of the year?
Exactly. Yeah, in that part of the year.
That's the
end of the
school year.
Exactly. And I knew I was going to be back in it, you know, come summer. And again, in hindsight, I should have probably continued playing because I just got sloppy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it was so my senior year, I started, you know, smoking a little bit. You know, I'd already been smoking cigarettes and stuff like that at a younger age, but, you know, smoking, you know, other stuff. And we, you know, after high school, that summer between leaving for college and just kind of went off, started drinking a little bit more and, you know, went to a couple parties and one of the parties that I went to, I was actually sober, and I was there with a few of my friends, and they were all wasted. And my buddy his dad had just bought him a car for graduation. It was a little Ford Escort, tiny little thing, but it was the coolest thing at the time. Yeah. Little Ford Escort.
Don't worry, it was a GT.
Yeah, well, I don't think so. I drove it like a GT though. So we were at a party, and, you know, we packed 6 people in it, and I was driving. I was completely sober, and, you know, power braking it around the corners and pulling the e-brake. And I drove that thing. I drove it like a GT3, to be honest with you. It was amazing. Through La Habra Heights, you know, at night.
Wow. We've done that a couple times.
Taking those turns way too fast and e-braking it. It was a fun time. You know, but it was stupid, you know. So kind of driving through the heights on the back roads. I'd never been to we're going to my friend's dad's house, and I'd never been there from the Heights side. I'd always come up from Whittier Boulevard
because there's the Fullerton Road.
Exactly,
the back way.
Exactly, and he lived on the east side of Fullerton Road. So I'd never gone through that way. And we come up, you know, we're driving. Like I said, I have, you know, 5 drunk people in the car and my sober, and everybody's screaming faster, like it was so much. I mean, it was fun. I'll be honest.
No,
it was
for
fun.
sure.
Yeah,
I've put it this way. I rode down on top of a truck, like on the hood of a truck coming down that same hill.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So I've been there.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So we came in from the top side, and every cul-de-sac in that community looked exactly the same. Like, we're driving straight, and it's like cul-de-sac. And he's like, you can't pull into my driveway. My dad's gonna kill me, you know. And I'm like, dude, you can only pull in your driveway. Like we're trying to be somewhat responsible, you know, in our irresponsible days, if you will. So I pulled over, got in the back seat, and he got in the driver's seat. Instead of making a left into the next cul-de-sac, he actually made a right. And his street was one street over to the west and around a corner, and then it was basically 1, 2, 3 corners, and we would have been at his house. We only made 2 of them. So he floored it, and of course riled up, and everybody's excited about, you know, how fast we were driving through. So he thought he could do a little bit better than I could. So he went flying down, hit a 15-mile-an-hour curve at about 60. Hit a van that was parked in a driveway. The van landed on the front lawn. We bounced off that, hit railroad ties around a tree, bounced off that, and landed in the bushes with I've heard another the axles were broken and the tires were flat. It looked like the DeLorean trying to take off. So
roads where we're going, we don't need
exactly.
roads.
That was clutch.
Yeah. So you know, my buddy looks at me. He's like, dude, drive me out of this. I'm like, are you crazy? I can't drive. Like, nobody can drive this car.
Yeah.
You know, and we were right around the corner from his house. I mean, if we could walk 100 feet forward and look over to his house. So essentially everybody was, you know, was intoxicated and tossed around the car, and everybody was, you know, kind of loose, if you will. I wasn't. I was completely tense, sitting behind the driver's seat with my arms locked on the headrest. Got out, and I was tight and didn't know what to do. And I ended up later on that night. So cops came, arrested him, did all that stuff, you know. And I just, over the next couple of days, my back started hurting more. My legs started hurting. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just knew there was something wrong with me, and I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't want to lose, you know, my future of playing ball. I wanted to go play ball, you know?
Yeah.
So I mean, for the next couple of weeks, 5-6 weeks or whatever, I was walking around, and my leg would give out on me, and I'd kind of fall over and catch myself. And it was a scary time, but at the same time, I'm like, dude, I can get out of it. I've been hurt a lot worse on the field. There's no way I can't walk this off, rub some dirt on it, whatever.
Yeah.
Just, you know, so I was just, you know, trying to fight through it. And, you know, fast forward, first day in Northridge, drive up there, get out. And the first thing I want to do, which is, I was so stupid. I slouched off the entire summer and the last half of the year, and the first thing they do is a condition test, right? You run lines back and forth, and you have to do it under a certain time. And probably the second line, my leg gave out face first on the ground. Got back up, started running. Boom, fell again. And I just kept falling. I couldn't do, and I almost hit the time even though I kept falling, but I was so out of shape, and the coaches came over to me. They're like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "Nothing." Just fought, like nothing. And then you go straight from there, and then they do physicals to make sure that, you know, you can get your pads and start hitting and do all that stuff. And we went in for physicals, and they kind of pulled me out. They're like, "Dude, just tell me like what's going on." And I told them, like, I got in a car accident, you know, a month or so ago, 8 weeks. I don't remember the timeline. And they're like, "Well, we're gonna send you in to get an MRI." So within an hour, my life had completely fallen apart. I found out I couldn't play ball anymore. I had a herniated disc in my L5, but I wasn't convinced I couldn't play. Right? They told me, "Look, we'll honor it for the first year." They did the right thing. They're like, "We'll honor your, you know, if you can play next year, great. You know, we'll try to get you conditioned and back in, and, you know, therapy and all that stuff." And I don't know I don't know if it was the insecurity, if it was just the lack of self-confidence. I don't know what it was, but I was like I didn't want to face the failure. I didn't want to face I can't do it. And I thought if I could hide it again, right? I mean, a lot of my life up to this point was hiding the truth and the pain and the hurt, you know, whether it's be at home or growing up. And you know, I just become conditioned to hide it. So I literally, you know, said some things and to the coaches to kind of screw off, if you will, and in other terms, and I got back in my car and, you know, drove away. And it's interesting because the person I called is probably the person that liked me the least at that point, and it was my ex-girlfriend's mom. I called, and she was a Christian, and, you know, and I remember her telling me that, you know, like, and I didn't believe it. I was just like, yeah, whatever. She's like, yeah, God, you know, God has a plan for you. And like, she was so sweet about it. And I was just like, not wanting to hear it, you know, not being a Christian, and, you know, her knowing I'm not a Christian, you know, it was kind of one of those low points in my life. And, you know, at that point I just kind of said, you know, screw it. You know, I'm done. I just kind of,
Did you use that injury as like maybe like a scapegoat because of the fear of failure that you had?
100%. Yeah, 100%. It was now I have a reason to fail, right? And I can.
It's not you. It's my injury.
It was the injury.
I can own this failure without losing face, if you will.
Yeah,
even though inside it was killing me,
for sure.
You know, and I never really shared that. You know, my good friends could tell. They were like, "Dude, you know, you need to get some some help or whatever, and they, mostly from them. I mean, we talked quite a bit, and you know, it was you know, coming back home after a day away at college, like that's
Not even a semester.
yeah, no. I made it not even through a full day, to be honest with you.
Wow.
I hung out in Northridge for a few hours.
It was a day
afterwards.
trip.
Yeah. It was crazy. It was just, you know, it was not the brightest point in my life, and you know, and unfortunately I didn't have the tools.
And your parents weren't involved in that part because you were saying that you were kind of like with your friends, family, so it's not they couldn't really have any input on what you were doing.
No, but I ended up going home.
Okay.
Yeah, and when I was there, the coaches called my mom, you know, and was like, you know, by the way, you have to remember these aren't cell phone days. These are when you pulled over to a payphone to call people.
Yeah.
This is when you left the house, you were gone.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean,
you ghosted.
yeah. So they knew my home phone number, right? I mean, they didn't have my pager number, right? I know pagers, but I know it's crazy.
I
Yeah.
used to wear mine on my hat.
Of course you did. Dang.
Okay.
We might not be able to continue this thing.
Yeah. I just want a picture.
Stop recording.
Yeah. So the only place they had to get a hold of me was at my parents' house, and they called there, and they were again. They were. I feel like a real jerk because I just I wrote it off so fast. I was done. As soon as I found out, I was done. I'm not hearing it. Don't want to go back. Don't want to work on it. I'm done. I'll go somewhere else and play. Right. So I tried to, you know, so I came home, and coach, like I said, they were really sweet about it, and I just kind of blew it off and said, nope, not interested.
Wow.
So, and then, you know, and there was some fear too of leaving and I didn't have the stability of knowing how to start a life on my own. So being away at college and doing that stuff, it scared the living daylights out of me. You know, like I just didn't, I didn't have the tools, or to be honest with you, the emotional capacity to do it on my own at that point, you know,
Right, yeah.
which is scary. So I mean, it was a good out for me. I mean, I hate to say it that way, you know, it's a kind of a coward's way out, but it's my story, you know?
Right, yeah. So the injury, did you have to like rehab that, or what was that?
So the injury, I went to a chiropractor in La Habra. Been there for years. Great guy. You know, he helped me kind of get through it. I still deal with it to this day.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's been 21 years I've had to deal with this injury.
Wow.
Yeah, with, you know, the leg, the hip, the back, like all of it just flares up, and so I'm reminded. Almost on a daily basis, I'd say. I mean, it's definitely on a weekly basis that I have a flare up in my back and have a difficult time, you know, getting around. So it's something that I haven't been able to let go, if you will. I mean, wow. I've you know, managed.
Does that pain bring back the way you felt at that time of your life?
Not
because it sounds like it was like a confusing time.
It's fun. It's funny you said that, because I actually wrote a. I know it sounds so bad, but I'm gonna go vulnerable here. I wrote a poem about my life at that time, and I was gonna try to find it to bring it here to
Try
read
not
it.
to laugh,
dude. It was horrible. It was seriously, yeah. It was seriously like she read it once, and she's like, "Wow, you were really lost." Like it was kind of like, you know, being.
When did you write it?
God, I was 19, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was right after all this happened, maybe a year and a half later, maybe 20. I was actually at Cypress College. You know, it was one of my writing classes, and
Charger.
You had to write on something. So I'm like, I'm down. Let's write. You know. So I started writing about, you know, being in a boat in the middle of the lake with no paddles, no oar, no way of navigating. And I was just like, when I went back and read it, 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, 4 or 5 years ago, I was just like, wow. Like, if I would have known I was that lost at that time, you know, or if anybody would have known, I'm sure they would have, you know.
Or you'd hope, yeah.
Yeah, you would hope somebody would, yeah. But I didn't have God. I didn't have, you know, those oars are God, you know, that being able to see through the fog, that's God, you know.
Amen.
So, so at that time, it was
Just to soften that blow a little bit, I wrote a book of poems when I was in the 4th grade.
Nice.
I lost it. Someone found it, and I could never find out who it was, and they were letting him out slowly but surely.
Oh,
Yeah, they tortured me about it. And
That's
they
awesome.
dude, and they were the cheesiest poems ever. I was writing about like red roses.
Roses are red.
Poor
Violets
Isaac.
are blue.
dang, that's rough.
Anyways, I feel you.
Yeah. So I was lost, right? I mean, I was completely lost. You know, I had some good people, good families, you know, surrounding me. But I never really opened up to anybody to really share where I was emotionally. Everybody saw where I was physically. Like you can kind of tell like he's broken, but I wasn't gonna talk about it. You know, and you know, over the next, I kind of say at that point I kind of just gave up on life, if you will, without fully giving up on life. I still lived kind of a facade of everything's fine. I'm good with this. This is where I want to be, you know. But nobody really wants to be there. You know, I was like I said, emotionally, I was a complete wreck. I was sleeping on couches, many couches. You know,
How are you coping with all this?
you know, I don't really have that addictive aspect to me, but I was certainly coping with partying. Right, I was overcompensating, having fun. Right, I definitely suffer with FOMO. I definitely suffer. I do
That's
not.
so funny. Me and Drew were talking about that this morning.
Oh, it's
For
horrible.
people that don't know, my mom listens. She probably doesn't know, but people like that. Fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Fear of missing out. So I would like literally when there's two things to do, I wouldn't know what to do. I would just be like, I'm so confused on which one because I didn't want to miss out on either one of them.
Yeah.
And I couldn't necessarily split myself. So that was kind of my, you know, I always wanted to be around fun. You know, I wanted to be the fun. I wanted to have fun. Where inside it was not fun. It was not a good time in my life. It was, you know, it was a pretty low time in my life, to be honest with you. And, you know,
Totally relate.
yeah, it was, you know, and then there was a point where, I mean, I had a good job, you know, in my early 20s, good job, made pretty decent money for 22, 23.
So on the outside, actually,
it did look,
yeah.
I didn't have a place to live. I mean, when I was, I think 23 was the first time. So I had 5 years of couch surfing. And then 22, 23, I actually moved in with a good friend of Nick and mine. And we, there was 3 of us in a bachelor pad for the next couple of years. And so, I mean, but even then I was, you know, I was lost. I was, you know, my inside, my life was just a complete wreck.
You felt like there was more to just partying and working, and there was something else to life.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out what everybody else's drive was, if you will. I mean, mine was just to hang out and, you know, and like watch, you know, others kind of move on in their you know, their growth in life, if you will. And everybody has their own pace, and you know, and I get that now, but at that time there's a lot of comparing and a lot of
wondering why is this person like graduating college or getting this job or whatever, and you're like, I'm stuck in this spot, and maybe continuing to do what's keeping you there because that's all you know how to do.
Yeah, I did a lot of partying, like more partying than I should have done. Gambling, you know, just ladies, like everything you shouldn't be really like kind of. I just want to do everything.
That's just what the world has to offer.
Definitely in the flesh.
Yeah,
definitely in the flesh.
Yeah, and that's where you, I mean, culturally and what you see in the media, that's where you're supposed to get your fulfillment from, you know, doing those things, you know, the good job or the, you know, money, the income, the women, the power, whatever. All of that is supposed to bring some kind of fulfillment, but it
sounds like you're watching a lot of Scarface.
On repeat.
Get the money.
But yeah, so I mean, I can totally see that because I feel like I was the same way to a certain extent.
I feel like you're telling my story. That's why I'm like, oh, I totally get it. Like I was I was doing the same thing.
Wow.
I mean, and same thing, watching my friends around me grow, you know, as into adults, and I'm like, why do I still feel so immature? And I didn't feel immature, but I just couldn't figure out why I was stuck in this place. And there was God was how I got out of it. So, but what was the other side of this?
So like I said, I lived there for a couple of years, and it was a good time. And we had great times, like from the flesh perspective, and and it was so I can't remember the exact date, but I went to Starbucks around the corner from where I was living, and I ran into Rachel's sister at Starbucks, and I was, I saw her, gave her a big hug, and she's like, "It's gonna date me again here." And she's like, "Oh, my sister and I were just looking at your MySpace," and I was like, "Yeah."
Did you have music on your MySpace?
I didn't have music on my MySpace.
So it was like you could pick like songs or something.
No,
or just
you were
one?
able to put whatever song you wanted to on
was
it.
it?
Just had to know how.
Yeah.
I didn't know how.
I didn't either. I actually never even had a MySpace. So.
Yeah.
No.
You're lame.
Yeah. Or he's young.
Yeah. No.
Or I was too cool for that.
Yeah.
Tried to be.
Yeah.
Definitely tried.
So I'm talking to her sister, and she's like, "Oh, my sister and I just saw your MySpace, and we were talking about you, and kind of rewind back to 2001. Rachel and I kind of hung out a little bit, and we were friends, and
you guys went to school together?
we went to school. I actually hit on her a few times at school, and
wait,
yeah.
how?
Oh, dude, you don't want my lines.
No, I do.
Believe me, they didn't work. You do not want my lines. So,
Hey, looking good.
yeah.
A public service announcement of what not to say.
What not to say? Yeah, I can teach you on how not to do this.
Sup, girl?
I
see you. You see me?
Hey, I got her though, so I got better over time.
Something happened.
Yeah, I got better over time. So this is 2001, and I always say that she hated me. So in high school I hit on her, and I always say that she hated me in high school. But if you ask her, she'll just say that she didn't care enough about me to feel anything, right? I mean, she was just kind of indifferent about me and my whole quote unquote jock persona and
Who
all
you
that
were.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, she wanted nothing to do with me. So fast forward. So we hung out in 2001 as friends, and just lost touch, completely lost touch for 3-4 years, and in 2005, in April,
Your roads cross.
we crossed. So I ran into her sister at Starbucks, and like I said, we were talking, MySpace came up, and I'm like, "Hey, give your sister my phone number, have her call me." And she's like, "Dude, you know my sister, she's not gonna call you." And I'm like, "Touche, give me her number, I'll call her."
Yeah.
So she gave me Rachel's number, and I called her that night, and I just happened to be leaving the next day to go to Cabo for 5 or 6 days for a wedding, and and I'm like, "Oh," so we talked we talked for hours, like we had never lost touch, and she was telling me kind of her story, and I'm like, "Oh, you did so good," and she's like, "No, God did it," and I'm like, "No, don't cut yourself short. You did it. It was all you, and I'm like, "I'm gonna come visit you," and she's like, "Yeah, whatever." No, everybody always says they're gonna come visit me, and nobody ever does, right? So I left for Cabo the next morning, and I was gone, and the whole time I was in Cabo, I couldn't get her out of my mind. And it was just driving me crazy. Like, you have the partings there, and you have all this going on, and I wasn't as interested as I was in getting, like, I wanted to pick up the phone and call her, but I'm in, I can't, right? So I got back, I think on Monday or Tuesday, and I called her on Wednesday, and I had my computer up, and I said, "What are you doing on Friday?" And she said, she said, "I actually have the weekend off." And I'm like, and she worked in the restaurant industry at the time, and you never get weekends off.
Right. Yeah.
So I was like, sweet. And I'm like, I have it Southwest up. Click. You're picking me up at the airport at 5. And she's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I told you I was going to come visit you. So I flew out there on Friday. She picked me up at the airport, and we had a really great weekend together.
Out where? Where is this?
In Phoenix.
Okay.
Sorry, I should. She had already lived in Phoenix
Okay.
at this point.
Yeah, gotcha.
And I was still in California in La Habra, actually.
So you got back from Cabo, ready to book your plane
book
ticket.
my plane ticket the very next day on the
Gotcha.
phone with her.
Awesome.
Booked a Southwest flight. she picked me up at 5:00 and we hung out and had an amazing time. And I ended up booking an early flight on Sunday. I had no idea what I was doing with travel. I didn't know how to do it. So I picked whatever. So I was like, I don't know, 1:00 or 11:00 in the morning. It was an early flight on Sunday. And she dropped me off at the airport. And of course I want to spend as much time as I could with her. So I like stretched it out as long as I could. And I literally was running through the airport to try to get home. And by the time I got up to the terminal, and, you know, I didn't have the app at that point or anything like that. And I got up to the terminal. They're like, sir, we're already, you know, loading the plane. We gave your seat away because you weren't here to check in. And,
Oh, dang.
and I'm like, what? I'm like, well, what's the option? They're like, we can get you on a later flight. We won't charge you for it. I'm like, okay, what are the options? And they're like, well, there's one at this time and one at like 7 or something. So I called her and I said, you know, where are you? And she's like, I'm still downstairs at the airport. And I was, I'm like, okay, wait there for me. I'm coming back down. She's like, wait, what? Right? I'm kind of impulsive. I booked a flight and flew to Arizona. I'm going to stay also impulsively, right? So I went downstairs and got in the car with her. And I said, what are we doing? Like, what do you want to do? And she's like, well, I was going to go to church. And I'm like, well, I want to hang out with you. In my head, I'm going, I want to hang out with her, so I'll go anywhere, right? It doesn't really matter where it's at.
For sure.
You know, so jumped in the car and we drove over to East Valley Bible and at East Valley Bible, you want to,
Just real quick. So you go to church. This is your first time in church. This is probably your first time. Was it a Christian church?
it was, it's a non-denominational Bible, and no, it's not. So earlier in my stories, I actually left this out, but early in high school, my friend around the corner went to I think it was Calvary Santa Ana, and Calvary Santa Ana went to Hume Lake for summer camp. So I went to Hume Lake for 2 years, and I felt the altar call pull me up there a couple times, and I didn't have the self-confidence to walk up there. I didn't know what it was. You know, I had no idea what I was experiencing. I wasn't, you know, probably emotionally mature enough, I think, at that point. You know,
How old were you? I'm sorry.
at that point, in Hume Lake, I was, what, freshman and sophomore? Yeah, so I think summer after 8th grade and summer after freshman year.
Cool.
So, you know, at Hume Lake, I've had a couple of interactions prior to this. Also, I went to Morning Star a couple of times with an ex-girlfriend, and her family went to Morning Star.
Oh, okay.
So I'd been at Morning Star
So
a few times.
it was familiar. It wasn't brand new to you.
It wasn't completely foreign, no. So I wasn't necessarily scared. I didn't really expect anything to happen. I thought I'd just sit in the pews like I always had and just let it go.
Get some more time to
Get some more time to hang out with her. Exactly. Exactly. So it was definitely flesh driven in my mind.
He gets us there sometime.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So we walk into church and sit down, and I know she's struggling this whole time, thinking, oh my gosh, this church is like.
I totally thought I was going to traumatize him. My church was not, they did not sugarcoat anything. I mean, they preached the gospel, they preached it every week, and he was just a really solid teacher as far as like the culture and our time and our culture. And I was totally scared that I was going to traumatize him forever.
So we sat down in church, and the Pastor Tom Schrader is just, I mean, so at this time I was doing mortgage lending. I was doing wholesale mortgage lending. So the pastor was a former commercial real estate broker, and I mean, so it felt like
It's a connection kind of thing.
dude, it was like everything he said was in financial terms, which I'm sure it wasn't, but it was just
That's
like
how you heard it.
That's how I heard it. I heard, you know, I don't know what he said or how he said it, but it was like, you know, basically directed solely at me in that entire place, right? I mean, I remember we were sitting and it just felt like he was talking to me. He was talking in my language, talking about my life. He was talking about some screwed up lives, and it was mine, you know? So he was just like, you know, preaching the gospel and, you know, talked about, you know, asking for forgiveness and I just remember putting my head down and, you know, and just asking God to forgive me for forgive my sins and to come into my life and take and I want to live for him. You know, I want this to be, didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I said it and I was like, I don't know where that came from or what this even means. There was a lot of confusion in it, but at the same time it felt so clear that it needed to be said.
And this was you on your own, or this was prompted by the pastor?
This
Saying,
is-
like, if you want this, pray this prayer, or were you kind of praying this on your own?
It was he actually was talking about it.
Okay.
You know, as far as like this is how, you know, it works. This is where you start.
Okay.
Like it was almost like
I was just curious as
yeah,
to,
it was a remedial teaching for me, you know, from the pulpit. He was like, you start here, then go here, and then go here, right? I mean, this is where you go.
Yeah.
So I followed direction, you know, first time in my life. And so, yeah, so I asked God to forgive me my sins, asked him to, you know, kind of just take my life and, you know, just felt this overwhelming just emotion of release. I mean, you know, and guilt. Like, I mean, there's just like immediate guilt for everything that I've kind of just chalked up as, it's a guy being a guy, right? I mean, just being in the flesh and it, at that moment, it just all hit me. And then it felt like it just kind of went away, you know, in a sense. And I was just like, and then a lot of reflection, you know, from that point, like, hey, forgive me for these things. And then like started thinking about all the different things. Yeah. And it was pretty heavy for me. I mean, even the night before I came out, I was, you know, partying pretty hard and, you know.
In Cabo?
No, I actually went out.
Or just
It went
the
out
night
in Brea. I went out in Brea before on Thursday night. So I got back on Tuesday, went out Thursday, flew out Friday, and you know I was partying pretty hard on Thursday as well. You know, and then flew out to visit her, and here we are in church on Sunday, and I'm going, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
My flight's overbooked. Like, come on. Like,
Yeah.
it was just, God had a plan for me, and
Definitely.
it was definitely my time, and, you know, Tom Schrader was speaking directly to me. I'm convinced of it, where I just heard selectively, learned how to do that there.
I don't want to overlook that moment that you had, that, you know, all this led up to you being in church for the first time forever, and then God speaking directly to you. It seems like that happens a lot. I told my story, like when I went to church, I was like, I found out who Jesus was, you know, it's like, oh, you know, and it's just, I feel like it's just crazy how God calls you into at that time. And it's like, it's time for you to hear, you know, the good news. So
yeah, it was pretty.
and then for you to be consumed by the Holy Spirit from what it sounds like, and just like being overwhelmed by the love and the peace that's available.
He literally looked like he saw a ghost when we left. Like he looked visibly different. Like he looked pale. He looked concerned, like very pensive, deep in thought. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've totally traumatized him.
Right. Because you don't know what's going on inside of his head.
No, I knew nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we leave, right? Where you go out to the car and she had this little Toyota truck with no air conditioning, and
In Arizona.
in May, right? I mean, it's not comfortable, right? So air conditioning, rolled the windows down, and I just kind of leaned over and laid my head on her shoulder, and she didn't know this, but I kind of started to cry a little bit, like, oh my gosh, what is going on with me? And my first prayer was, you know, for God to come into my life. My second prayer within an hour was for God to take her out. I said, take her out of my life. There's no way I could be the man to take care of her, right? I mean, I knew what I was doing on Thursday night, and she had shared with me that she was sober, right? And it didn't align with my lifestyle. I had no idea what that would look like, right? So I just prayed to God. I said, man, if there's no way in your creation that I can be the right man for this woman. There's no way. So take her out of my life, because I'm gonna hurt her. But I didn't share this with her. So she drops me off at the airport. So she drops me off at the airport a little bit later. I get home, and you know, my third prayer later that night, it's probably midnight when I get home, and I'm laying there and I just don't know what happened. It was a complete whirlwind just completely took over. And then my third prayer, all within a 24-hour period. And I'm just going to say exactly what I said. I said, God, I don't have the balls to walk into a church. I don't own a Bible. I don't know what to do. If this is real, you need to make it happen. Like, you never challenge God, right? I mean, he's kind of fighting a losing battle there. But I challenged him. I said, this can't be real. If this is every emotion that I was feeling was the culmination of 25 years of pain that just kind of came up, and it was intense. It was intense. And then to confuse it with having her there, then I'm totally going to screw up. Yeah. Right? I mean, so I called her and I'm bawling. I'm just completely just bawling. And
I thought, oh my God, I really traumatized him.
Right.
So I told her, she goes, well, what happened? And I kind of went through the steps and left out, the whole praying about taking her out of my life out of that one. But
Yeah. I didn't need to hear that.
That would have went over well.
yeah. By the way, you're gone, but help me with this while you're here. So we, so she prayed with me on the phone and explained kind of what was going on. And, she had a grounded faith and I just, I didn't know what to do. And I told her, I said, this is what I prayed in church. This is what I prayed when I got home. And she's like, just wait, God will show you.
I love that.
And I was like, I don't like that. You love it. I didn't like it. I was like,
no.
I want to know
like
now.
Yeah. Not in the
For
moment.
sure.
Not in the moment.
I can appreciate it like that now.
Yeah.
But at the time I did not want it. And so I was in the mortgage industry, right? I mean, it's 2005, the height of the...
You're killing it.
Yeah, we're doing really well. I mean, but then I started feeling convicted. I had a meeting the next day at a broker, right? Because we did wholesale, so they would sell to consumers and then call us and say, hey, I got this consumer with this profile, and we would basically underwrite it and fund it. So I went in, I had a meeting, and I called her from the parking lot, and I'm like, dude, I don't know if I can go in here. Like, I'm pretty sure that what they're doing up there isn't right 100%. There's got to be, there's just too much going on, right? I mean, yeah, so I mean, there was some concerns there. But I had never really felt convicted about it. And here I am sitting in the parking lot going, I'm going to just walk out on a meeting. And she goes, you never know what God's... I called her. She's my spiritual advisor at this point, right? Only person I know that can help me right now, although I want her gone.
She knows the big man upstairs. Yeah. I'll hit her up.
So I called her and kind of walked her through, and she's like, babe, just go upstairs. Go up there. You made it. God wants you to keep your commitments. Right? And I'm like, oh gosh, not this one. So I went upstairs and I had, one of the guy I was meeting with, he and I had a lot of conversations about our partying days and women. And, that was kind of our banter, it was all the flesh. And I walked in and I saw a different guy in there that I'd never met before on a desk over here, over to the left. And he was sitting in a desk to the right. And I started talking to him, and also I started throwing God's name out, like, God this and God. I'm like, wait, what's going on? And he's like, oh, I don't do any of that stuff anymore, man. Like, I'm like, what? And then the guy next door, like in the desk I never met before, never saw again after this moment, said, yeah. And I told him, I said, here's what happened to me this weekend. And they're like,
wait, is that guy still in the room with you?
The other guy's in the room. They're both. So the one that I went there to meet with had changed his life as well, and was living for Christ. And then the other guy I'd never met before started quoting scripture. And I'm like, what? So I start talking to him, and he's like, I'm like, I don't know what any of this means. And he's like, do you have a church? And I'm like, no. And he's like, I go to Calvary, Costa Mesa.
Oh.
Come there. You'll just walk in. You'll feel great, right? So I get there. I can't find him anywhere. But I was like, I just challenged God, right? So fast forward a little more. So I hadn't gotten to Calvary yet, by the way. I didn't go straight there. So I left that appointment, called her, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you'll never believe this. And she's like, well, you prayed for that.
Yeah.
Oh my
right?
God,
you prayed
sick.
for God to tell you where to go. And I'm like, I did. You're right. And then I went back to the office, and
Were you not tripping at this point?
I was totally tripping. and I walk in the office to one of our underwriters' offices because I had a loan that was in the midst, and I had to, try to figure out what conditions and stuff. And I walked in, and Cheryl looks at me, and she goes, "You look different." And I'm like, "What do you mean I look different? I didn't lose that much weight, right? Or did I gain weight, right?" It was one of those things. And she's like, "No, you just look different." She's like, "What'd you do this weekend?" Like out of the blue.
And who is this?
This is one of our underwriters in the office.
Sorry.
And I go, "Well, I went to," and I just thought, she asked, I'm going to share it because so I told her what happened. And she's like, "I'm a Sunday school teacher." And she literally looks at me and says, "Do you have a Bible?" And I just told God, I don't know what to do. I don't own a Bible. I don't know where to go. I don't know. I don't know anything. The next day I had a Bible sitting on my desk.
Wow.
In a bag. And she bought me my first Bible. It was like, I'm just like the next few days, it's just like that. And then I walked into another broker where, primarily Spanish speaking clients and things like that. And, it's like 5 families in a home, and, they pay their bills and stuff, but they don't necessarily qualify on their own. And I was feeling convicted again to not go in. And she's like, "Dude, you know what he did the last time? Just go in there." So I called her, and I walk in and I start talking to that broker, and she's like, I started talking about God, and I'm like, "This is crazy." Like, I don't know I didn't know it wasn't kind of like when you buy a new car, you never see it on the road until you own one. Yeah. It's like, all of a sudden, it's like God surrounding me with these people that have been in my life this whole time.
Right.
And she's like, "Hey, do you want to go to a Bible study?" And I'm going, "Well, how do I say no now?" Right? I mean, God's already given me a church, a Bible,
now a
Bible study. I'm like, "Sure." So, and it was that night. So I walk into this Bible study, and it was an advanced apologetics class. So needless to say, it was definitely over my head,
right.
But it told me, this is what, God's here, right? And he knows a lot more than you do, because he's going to put you in here and show you what's up.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, and God knew that I needed to be beat over the head in order to see him and see his love, because I didn't know that fatherly love. I to this day I struggle with that, and we have a Tuesday night Bible study that we do, and that's kind of my biggest thing, is when we talk about, God's love for us and fatherly love, and I have a hard time accepting it because I don't know how, right? But I can tell you this, having kids, it definitely starts to, you start to understand what a fatherly love is when you give it, right?
Yeah,
when you start to share it.
That's when I first realized what God's love was like, because when I had my first kid, and I was just like, "Oh, I get it." I get it. So
but to a whole nother extreme, because we're just simple humans, that we can love our children like that, but God is God, and how does
his love is so much greater. Think about that, how great his love is.
Right.
But to think though, like how you were saying, like everything that you had, this whole past, not knowing, not wanting, but not knowing what to want, and all this stuff, and then you just asked for God to be with you and to lead you, and within, what is this, within a week
days,
period?
Within a week I was at church, had a Bible, went to an apologetics class.
He gave you everything that you could ever need within a few days. That something that you were searching for 25 years. Yeah. And to me, I'm just like, what the heck? Like, holy smokes! Like,
that's my holy smokes moment right there.
I'm blown away right now. That's intense.
Yeah, and
that's intense.
It's amazing.
I love that. I love those Jesus stories, bro. This is why we're doing this, to hear stuff like that, because it's like, no, God does this, like, it's
on a daily,
and it pumps me up. It pumps me up. I gotta go, guys. I gotta go take some laps around the parking lot.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, like just his relentless pursuit for us, and he's gonna do whatever to get you. And like you said, you needed something maybe a little bit more abrupt than other people, but God knew exactly what you needed. And to your point too about challenging God, I think about that, like God's a big enough God for us to challenge him, yell at him, be mad at him. He can handle it, and so people out there, challenge God, say, if you're real, show up, and
he will.
If you're genuine about it, and like he did for you. Hopefully, it could be for others.
It was an amazing experience. I'll tell you that. It was life changing.
I imagine. So we're gonna take a break here, and we will continue the story with Rachel and both Tom and Rachel and their story together on the next episode. So thanks for listening. This is already turning out to be a great story, and we can't wait to hear what's gonna happen, how this thing finishes out.
To be continued.
To be continued. So with that,
open your eyes, listen closely, soften your heart, and ask God to reveal himself to you.
amen.